So, good morning, everyone, again. And thank you so much for being here today. So, you already discussed a lot about participation and the best practices. So, I would like to focus a little bit more on what makes good participation. What are the golden rules, and what are the things that can go wrong, and what are the things that can go really well, based on the examples from abroad. But before we start, let's just do a quick review of what is good participation and what can bad participation actually lead to. So good participation, as you already discussed, is something that brings communities together. It makes people sit at the same table and discuss issues. And by doing so, people actually reach broader consensus and they make better decisions. And so in the future, all of the stakeholders are much more likely to actually work together efficiently, and they are much more likely to engage with each other in the future. However, bad participation, on the other hand, is much more likely to make communities less engaged because people lose trust in the processes much easier. And so in the long term, it actually is a bit harder to make people work together even on different issues that don't really require participation. However, needless to be scared, there are a little bit of tweaking that you might need to do, and there are some golden rules that you can follow. They are very comprehensive, they are easy, they've been tested everywhere, and there are some good and bad examples of how those rules can be applied. And so the first one is understand the target group. It sounds very easy. Let's say you're doing a project related to the youth, and the most obvious thing to do is to engage the young people. But those are not the only stakeholders in the process, so you need to think who else interacts with them, who also has the say in those issues. And so a good thing would be to go to schools, go to universities, go to people who interact with those young people on an everyday basis. And you need to understand that there is always, and I mean always, a handful of people that are called a vocal minority. Those are the people who have strong opinions, they have their own idea of what needs to be done, and they are often treated as representative of a whole community, which by no means they are not. You shouldn't exclude them, and you should always try to engage them in a constructive dialogue. But you should always try to reach a broader audience, people who are usually silent, who don't necessarily feel comfortable participating. The good example of such a process is Type A consultation on Uber regulations. So once Uber got to the Taiwanese market, there are, as usual, a couple of issues around it. And so the Taipei government invited a lot of different stakeholders. Uber is a company, some experts from the city hall, taxi drivers, employees of the Uber, and of course the general public, people who actually use services of both taxis and Uber, and all of them together, they were able to identify the wishes, the needs, and construct good regulations that are now in place. The next rule follows from understanding the target group, is you need to define the rules. And by defining the rules, I mean define them clearly from the very beginning, communicate them well, and stick to them. It sounds very easy, but one thing is important. Try to account for everything. And as you might know, if there is something that can go wrong, it most likely will go wrong at some point. And so you should always think about this in advance so that you don't change the rules in the future. Because once you change the rules in the process, people actually lose trust because they don't understand why it happened. So it has to be transparent that the rules are going this way and that it's not going to change in the middle. A bad example of setting the rules is actually Paris, which is a big city that runs one of the biggest participatory budgetings in the world. However, in 2016, Paris did not define what kind of proposals people can submit. And one of the proposals was demolishing of one of the most iconic buildings in Paris, which is Sacré-Cœur, a cathedral that's on the top of Montmartre. That proposal didn't go on a ballot, but because it was public, people had to even discuss this, which is ridiculous in itself, but because the rules were set up this way, it had to be a part of a debate. The next rule that goes from defining those is actually communicating them well, and communicating well throughout the whole process. And you need to know that extensive communication is not necessarily an answer. Intensive communication is much more important. And by intensive communication, it means utilizing the channels that your target audience uses. So again, let's go to the example of engaging the youth. If you're talking to young people, maybe inviting them to public meetings is not necessarily the best answer to it. because they don't usually go where they don't have time. Sending them a postal letter is not necessarily also the best way to go about it, because they usually don't read those. So maybe consider social media or some other form of engagement with them. And you can easily get statistics on what social media they actually use, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and you get a lot of feedback from them on it. But generally, don't be shy to use social media, even if you're engaging with broader audience and not just the young people. Because in Europe right now, same as in North America and a lot of other regions, even older people and the older generations actually do use social media. And also encourage people to talk to each other. There is nobody else to advocate for a cause than an engaged citizen who is excited about your project. Those are the people who are going to be bringing friends and family to those meetings and discussions, and who will be volunteering their time and the time of their family and friends to your project. One of the bad examples of it is actually New York City participatory budgeting as well, which is the second biggest PB in the world. But because they have a really heavy focus on public meetings, they were not successful in communicating it to all of the public. Consider the fact that New York is 9 million inhabitants, and they ran a PB process in half of the districts, meaning they were able to reach 4.5 million of people. The number of people who voted in 2017 was 100,000, which is a little bit over 2%. So communication is important, because otherwise it doesn't matter how good your project is and how much money you're willing to involve. If you cannot engage the people through communication, you're just not going to get the information that they might be willing to provide you with. And once you communicate with people, you have to keep them engaged. You have to keep them excited and motivated. And there are a couple of things you can do about this. The first one is provide incentives where it's appropriate. And the good example of it, which surprisingly so, is Moscow City platform called Active Citizen. They actually have a platform where people get participation points by just logging on the platform or voting on the polling. And through this participation points, they can actually get free tickets for parking in the city or discounts for theater or museums. It is expensive and not everyone wants to go this way, and there so far have been just a handful of cities that tested it, but successfully so. But there is a much easier way to keep people motivated and engaged, which is just delivering what you promised on time. So throughout the whole process, clearly explain to people what are you going to do and what's going to be the outcome of it. And once you promise it, even if it's a report, even if it's a public meeting, just follow with it. People will be happy to see that they are listened to. They will be happy to see what their information and their feedback resulted in. And so they will be more likely to participate in anything you do in the future. And the last rule, I think, applies to all of you since you're here today, is admitting what you don't know. It's okay not to be an expert on everything. And in the modern world, with a lot of technologies and methodologies being developed, if not every day, but every week or a month, it's very hard to keep up with the speed of things moving and going in different directions. So it's important to understand the limitations of what you can do on your own and being comfortable engaging with the experts who can provide you with help, provide you some suggestions about what you can do. So I encourage you to keep on learning, to keep on improving, and have a great day today.